maybe we shall wait for another minute or two for people to join in, and then we can start. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Harshvardhan Zatkar, and I am the convener for the panel Equitable South-North Collaborations for Just Energy Transitions. Today we have Jakub Mulugeta with us, who will be chairing this panel, Lilia Couto, who will be presenting the results from the South-North Collaborations workshops that we conducted at UCL, and Pedro Alarcón and Mariana Cautelianos, who will be presenting their work, which you have already seen on the website. Just as housekeeping rules, we would like to request you to keep your microphones off throughout the panel, but please feel free to keep your videos on. And if you have any questions that you would like us to discuss or ask the panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will be collecting them and we will take them up in order. So I would like to now hand over to Jakub Mulugeta to start the panel.
Thank you, Harsh, and thank you everyone for being here. My name is Jakub Mulugeta. I'm Professor of Energy and Development Policy at University College London, and we have a session around equitable North-South collaboration for just energy transition. This is the session that we're in, and of course, in this context, the importance of justice-oriented energy transition is gradually becoming a global mission. And this would require knowledge, in particular from in and from the global South, and I'm underlining in and from to highlight the importance of both. And so the relationship between global North and global South researchers and the relationship between institutions does matter in the way that the quality of the research, but also the equity dimension associated with it. So this session is to really interrogate the challenge of equitable partnerships among institutions and researchers from the global South and the North. It builds on ongoing work at University College London under the Energy Development Group, and we are hoping to build a network that begins to think collectively and develop some knowledge into the future. Now we have three panelists. The firstly, we will kick off with Lilia Couto, who will get us started with the presentation, 10-15 minute presentation on the outcomes of a North-South collaboration workshop that we conducted recently. Then will be followed by Pedro Alarcón to talk around just transition global South epistemology in about let's say 3 minutes or so, and then we'll finish off with Mariana Cautelianos on pathways of building living lab, human-centered experiment, should I say. Again, 3 minutes, Mariana. I know it's short, but it'll give us a bit more time to come back and have further discussions. And then we'll leave around 20 minutes or so at the end. So let me invite Lilia.
Thank you, Jakub. I'll share my screen because I have a presentation. Can you see it?
Yes.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. As Harsh and Jakub said, I'll be talking about this project that we have at the UCL Energy and Development Group. I'm sorry, I currently have COVID, so I may cough in the middle of the presentation and my voice is not the best, but yeah, just a caveat. So our project here at UCL, as you can see, is called How Can We Improve South-North collaborations in energy and development research. So this project is something that we created, inspired in some literature. Part of it that we produced, like members of the group produced and published. And specifically this first paper here in orange, which I did myself with my friend Moazali, who's also a researcher at UCL. So I'll talk a little about this particular paper that inspired the project before, and then I'll talk about the survey that we did before the workshop that we conducted. So this paper that inspired the project, it was first published as a policy brief of the Climate Compatible Growth Program, and then we published it as a working paper at the Cambridge Economics Series, and now it's under review at Energy Policy. So first, we had a couple of hypotheses behind it that we wanted to test. So basically, we worked with a sample of papers published in the energy and development field. So basically, papers specifically proposing energy policy for developing countries exclusively. Because we had this feeling and these hypotheses about like researchers in global north countries doing research to influence energy policymaking in developing countries. And we also had some hypotheses regarding the funding. So what we thought was that there was this kind of vicious cycle of imbalances in knowledge production in energy policy and propositions for policymaking. There was researchers in global north institutions get funding from global north countries to study global south countries. They propose energy policy for global south countries, and they become more they have more influence. They become more influent than papers produced in by global south researchers about their own geographical context. So we got this very big sample from the Web of Science database. Initially, we worked with over 29,000 papers, but then we filtered the sample until we got a sample that we were sure was only focusing on developing countries and proposing energy policy for developing countries or low and middle income countries, which is this gray circle with almost 4,300 papers. And within them, we also got a subsample of the papers that provide funding information so that we could test our hypothesis for funding. And this sample was of 905 papers. So basically, this is the graph that we consider that has one of the main messages of the paper, which is the log of the GDP of the country of first author versus total citations. So again, reminding you that these papers that we looked at are only exclusively papers proposing policies for developing countries. And still we see that whenever a paper whose first author is from a global north country, even if it's only about developing countries proposing policies for low and middle income countries, they get more cited than when papers are published by authors from countries of lower GDP. And then we also tested our hypothesis for funding. So this also has a very strong message on what we thought. You can see on square one that here we plotted GDP per capita of country of funding versus GDP per capita of country of first author of the papers. And we again see that most of the funding countries are high income countries. Okay, that's expected, but they are funding mostly high income country authors to study developing countries. We again reinforcing the message that here we see that global north countries are the one funding the most research about developing countries, and they give this funding mostly to their own researchers. So not much funding goes to developing country authors. And also what is in square 2 is also a strong message, because here we can see that even when low-income countries provide funding for research, they give this funding to authors from the global north. So the GDP of the countries, of the authors receiving funding from low and middle income countries is higher, is always higher than their own, and is normally like those researchers receiving funding from low and middle income countries are normally from high income countries. So from these messages that we got in this paper, we realized that there's probably this like vicious cycle of imbalances, that we see that these papers that we analyzed normally, although they are from particular low and middle income countries, normally the first author is from a high income country. So we started looking at these imbalances in partnerships, because we could see that some of the authors are from the country analyzed, but they are hardly ever the first author. So we started thinking about this project that we got a grant from UCL to do, to improve this kind of South-North collaborations in energy and development research. So to try to improve these collaborations in a way that they become more equitable, and the kind of imbalance that we analyzed is at least mitigated. So we did this survey. Before we did our workshop, we don't have a lot of results. We haven't systematized results from the workshop yet, but the survey that we did to inform the workshop was really interesting. So we got respondents from mostly from Global South countries, and almost all of them are university researchers. And the main message that we can see here in their responses is that blue is Global North researchers and orange is Global South researchers. So here we can see that normally the Global North researchers they dominate conceptualization of the project, the method design, and this is also something that appeared in our workshop and appeared a lot in discussions of the paper and also in this project. So the Global North researchers dominate method design. Normally, these are like quantitative methods, models that were developed in Global North countries and only adapted to be applied in some of the Global South countries analyzed. They secure funding, most of all, like 81%. And they do like ethical approval permits. So the planning of the project is normally done by Global North researchers, but then we see that data collection and preparation, and even desk-based analysis is mostly done by the Global South researchers. But then when it comes to publishing, most of the responsibility goes back to Global North researchers. So we can see here that the main contributions of the papers are normally come from the Global South researchers, but then the ones who have most of the ownership of the methods and the one who lead the publications are the ones from the Global North. So just wrapping up, I just brought like 2 positive aspects and 2 negative aspects that I think also speak a lot from our survey. So here we can see again, orange is low and middle income respondents. Here we can see that they are the ones who think partnerships are worth it, because then they can have access to funding they wouldn't have otherwise. And high income country respondents think that a positive aspect is to get, because of partnerships, is because local knowledge helps adapt research to local context, which also shows that Global North researchers tend to have their frameworks ready and then they adapt to a new country. Impact and recognition was also seen as a positive aspect. So high-income countries think that, respondents think that mostly through these collaborations, they can have more impact in the countries that they are studying. So that they seem to realize that in order to have an actual impact, to influence policymaking in the countries they are doing research about, they should have partners in the country. But then we see that low and middle income country respondents, they don't see so much opportunity for an impact through the partnership. And also new opportunities to solve problems is something that the high income countries respondents see, because again, it seems like they are applying some framework that they already have to solve the same problem or similar problems to a set of different countries. And then negative aspects, context and communication. We see that many of the low and middle income country respondents think that Global North researchers do not understand local context, and they see this as a very negative aspect. And they also see as another very negative aspect, power imbalances leading to unequal collaborations. I think this is the largest percentage we got, or one of the largest percentages. So it also calls a lot of attention that the partners from low and middle income countries see this way. Thank you. This is my email if anyone has any doubt or wants any material. And here is also the link for the UCL Energy and Development Group, which is responsible for the project, not only myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilia. Very, very brave of you. And, I know you're not feeling great, but really wonderful presentation. It's got us started. Well done. Thank you. So can I now invite Pedro to do your 3 minutes just summary of your paper, please?
Yes, I need less than that, hopefully.
Okay.
Well, in my contribution, Just Transition, including a global South epistemology, I advocate a broader, more global approach for the emerging concept of just transition. This wider lens Lilia spoke about. Therefore, I highlight two characteristics of global Southern countries that stem from their traditional position of suppliers of raw material and energy resources to the world economy. First, I suggest the concept of reloaded extractivism to address boosted fossil fuel extractivism in flat contradiction of Paris Agreement's goals, together with enhanced mineral extractivism for the sake of the current energy transition towards renewables. The war in Ukraine, in the short term, is pushing global northern countries to seek for alternative fossil fuel suppliers other than Russia. In the long term, however, energy security concerns, together with the need for climate action, will further support the energy transition. Second, I underscore the importance of coal and of what I call cheap oil or subsidized oil products, especially gasoline, diesel, and liquefied petroleum gas, to the domestic energy supply in most global southern countries. Coal and subsidized oil products are not only essential to electricity generation and to move the domestic economy, but also are strongly related to the idea of development in the social imaginaries of global southern countries. With these ideas, I emphasize on the need of incorporating a more global perspective when thinking the just transition, and invite to discuss the possibility of a growing tension between the quest for global sustainability versus local or national development. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Really, really interesting paper. Do you have that paper fully submitted or written somewhere? I mean,
No, it's not fully submitted.
Okay.
Not now.
Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to read it, but thank you very much. Mariana, let me turn to you for your 3 minutes. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your presentation so far. So my project, the one I presented on, was part of the Modern Energy Cooking Services program, which aims to increase access to clean cooking fuels in the Global South by leveraging progress in electrification. So it's really making that link between clean cooking and electricity transition. And I was hired as a human-centered designer on the project, which was very novel for that program. They're trying to infuse it with more human-centered design. And so just to give a sense of what that is, human-centered design methods constitute a problem-solving approach that focuses first and foremost on the needs of people and stakeholders. And they have been shown to be effective at identifying local needs and contextual constraints. So thinking back to Lilia, your mention of needing to understand the context for studying technology uptake, and they're increasingly being used in Global South contexts. And so we try to implement, a certain type of human-centered design methodology, which is called Living Lab. It's a methodological framework which focuses on in situ experimentations with various stakeholders being co-creators, being really part of the research. So going back to that participation piece, Lily, I saw a lot of synergies with your presentation and mine. So we basically tried and are still trying to implement this Living Lab in Kenya and Tanzania within the context of a technology-driven trial where we basically gave people batteries and electric cooking appliances for them to transition their cooking towards electricity-based cooking. And from this actual experimentation and trying to implement the Living Lab framework with the help of country partners, I mean, they were actively involved in the process, we realized that it's really hard to implement an actual Living Lab, and that despite our best efforts, we never really got there. To reflect on where we got in achieving true participation of both country partners and participants in the experiment, we used the IAP2 spectrum of public participation, and we used that as a basis. We added some additional principles of participatory design and adapted that spectrum to the MEX context in particular. And this tool is one of the outcomes of the project, and we're hopeful that it can help the broader MEX community to reflect on the methods that they use within the program as they relate to public participation. So as they relate to including country partners and even the recipients of the research or the trial as actors in designing the research from the start. I'll end there and hopefully we'll get to our questions as well. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mariana. Really interesting, many questions there as well. Yeah, sort of, I'd like to open the floor. We know many, but I'm sure we have lots of questions to ask each other. There are some that are coming through. So anyone would like to raise their hand? Okay, what I will do, since we don't have a lot of time, is I'll read out one which was sent by Mariana. Yeah. So it goes like this: acknowledging that Northern institutions hold a lot of power when it comes to collaborative research with partners in Global South, how have you experienced success in sharing power in such projects? I guess, this is really a question for all of us, because it goes to the heart of what Lillian was presenting, but also what we've all experienced. Lillian, you had your hand up, is it?
Yes. So first and foremost, I think we need to actually invite Mariana and Pedro to participate in the initiatives of our project from now on.
Okay.
This is a very good question. I don't have the answer. I actually had more questions for you, Mariana. So I think I could probably elaborate a bit on them and ask them, and then we could try to discuss more than one question at a time because they are related. So first, congratulations on your research. Your approach to collaborations of this particular project, it seems to be much more advanced than I normally see in trying to, at least trying to be inclusive and share the ownership. I wondered while watching your presentation, I wondered how we could try to translate that effort into research that is more on the macro level rather than the micro level, because myself and many colleagues at UCL, including Moise, my co-author, we tend to do macro level research, and the main audience of these pieces of research that we do are like policymakers rather than people on the ground. And I find it quite hard to see this inclusiveness in these kind of macro level projects. So I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate further on like how to move towards the collaborative, collaborate you called, or even empower stages that you mentioned. Because you showed quickly in your presentation, but even like the slides, I couldn't really see what was in them. And I of course know you didn't have the time to elaborate a lot on them. So if you could use the time now to talk more about these stages, it would be great. And also one tricky question, if you could explain to which extent you had local researchers as co-leads of the project. Thank you.
Is this question to Mariana, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. While keeping in mind, you know, the broader question that that I fired early, but please, Mariana, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. These are wonderful questions. I'll start with the second one. I think it's a bit easier because it's just telling you about how the project went and is still going. So we were basically collaborating with country partners is the official term. We use them in the program. So those are locally based research institutions that a lot of the times we have a history of working with. And so, you know, they have a budget that is just to define kind of what that relationship looks like. They usually have a budget for the project and a certain number of tasks that are defined in that project. The way it happened for the project I was in is I came in with hoping to do a lot more participatory work. And so the way the partnership was already set up kind of created the first tensions. And I'll just start there. I know we don't have a lot of time, but it was really interesting to me that there was already a tension because the budget was already determined before I was, before I was even hired or all that. There was a tension between trying to get more participation from the country partners in designing the methods and having an active say, and realizing that that's a lot more work than just being told what to do and then going and doing it, right? Giving feedback on interviews, doing interview trials all together, deciding who should be interviewed and why and when. I mean, that's a lot of work. And if that's not built into the contract from the get-go, then you're effectively underpaying your country partners. So there was like from the start really a tension there, which is why moving back to that framework of the difference between collaboration and empower, when we tried to map those back to what our project looked like and think about how we could go through those stages to get to empower, you just had to scrap everything and start back. So when I showed kind of those, graphs with the different colors for the different stages, the last one, empower, is just a completely different color because we recognize that even just the way you set up the project from the very start is going to have really wide implications towards the latter. The other thing I'll say about moving through the stages is to really reflect on which moments you want to actually be towards empower and which others we can actually leverage our privilege and our power in the global north to just do things for the global south and not putting that burden on them. So that's another point of tension and an interesting reflection tool that hopefully the framework can provide.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you. I'd like to bring, if you don't mind, Lilia, I'd like to bring Pedro in the conversation as well. I mean, it's a twofold question, Pedro. I mean, on the one hand, I think what you are really alluding to is that the whole justice envelope needs to be broadened. The way in which we look at things is, we cannot just be talking about whatever energy, just energy transitions at the user end only, but rather widen that towards the extractive industries and others. The way in which inequalities are very much built into the whole system across the chain. And it really is a compelling issue because then what it means then is that the more the world decarbonizes, the more injustice that we end up committing. So I mean, do you see then parallels between the previous energy system that we have, which is fossil fuel based, and the current, or at least the way in which it is governed at the moment, the way in which renewables are progressing towards, hence creating almost the same type of problems, but in different parts of the world, perhaps? That's one question to reflect on. And just another one that was added, Pedro, is, do you think that that equitable, so in a way, research has a role to play to try and highlight some of these challenges. So do you think that equitable South-North research collaborations, would they have a potential to improve, structural energy inequalities, or at least in trying to highlight them and be able to do something about it? Thanks.
Okay. Yes, this power relations within the research teams, that reflects the power relations between the global North and the global South. And that's a bad beginning. But the inequalities, what I'm seeing now is the inequalities of the reigning energy system very much likely will reproduce with the new reality of the energy transition. Let's say extractivism, let's say the sacrifice zones where the raw material is extracted from the earth. Let's say dependency. Global southern countries will, in the long term, will be more dependent on foreign technology, because in the global south we don't have the technology, wind energy technology. We import that. We need to purchase solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, electric cars. We have to import them, to buy them abroad at fixed international prices or market prices. What now I'm very pessimistic, but the good thing, now let's turn optimistic, is that the concept of just transition is still under construction. It stems from a very specific area in the labor studies, from labor unions in the global North, but it's now incorporating very interesting debates on energy justice, climate justice, environmental justice, and why not epistemic justice. So this is a very good thing, because it opens gates for collaboration and to review and always renew the concept, with a more global perspective. So I see that as a very positive point we need to work further on.
Thank you, Pedro. I mean, I'm sure many of us will engage you outside of this session, because it's too complex and very important as well to keep that. Lilia, you had your hand up for 5 years.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to say that I also saw it as a very nice point that Pedro brought on the role of the critical minerals for the transition to low carbon economy, and also the fact that most of the mines will be in developing countries. it was really interesting also to watch your presentation, Pedro. Thank you very much for that. And I was just wondering, because you mentioned like economics and the economics field in your presentation more than once. And another debate that we've had, and we also discussed in the paper that I talked a little about, is the fact that energy studies seem to lag behind other fields in terms of acknowledging this kind of colonial or imperialistic bias to research. We don't talk as much about it as other fields. And when we did this paper, when we wrote this paper that I showed, we couldn't find any paper to cite in the energy field or even the climate field. So it felt hard to write about it because we have a lot of anecdotal evidence. And we have a lot of literature to cite from development studies, from economics, but not from the energy or climate field as such. So I'm sorry, I'll have to leave because I have another very important meeting to join, but I just wanted to leave this thought and see if you have the same feeling and whether you have any ideas to fill in that gap. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lilia. Harsh, do we have any more minutes? 1 minute, 2 minutes? Just to, so that, Pedro and Mariana could say a few words.
Sure. I mean, we have 1 minute left to.
Do we get unplugged? Is that what happens?
Sorry. If you like, you can keep chatting or discussing as long as you like. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it won't be long because I'm sure everyone has lined up other meetings. But I mean, I wonder if, Mariana, you could say just a few words in terms of, because one of the things you said was it was difficult to implement, these living labs. Is that something to do with design, or is that something to do with not having, the right size of human resources on the ground? I mean, sometimes when I am doing some research in Uganda, in Ethiopia, and so forth, I mean, I know these places. I grew up in Ethiopia, but I don't know it anymore because it's been, many years since I've left. So, I mean, I go back in and out as a stranger, but not quite as a resident. I mean, do you see this as one of the challenges that somehow those of us who are working in the global north, whether we originate from the continent or whatever or not, we still have, a gap that we haven't been able to address. Whether that's also playing out in some of the experiments that you did. And then to Pedro, if you could reflect on, if you were to kind of explore this question of, these parallels that we are seeing, as you said, on the one hand, these kind of dependencies that are being recreated all over again. What kind of, political or what type of investments would, for example, lead to something which is different, where, let's say, manufacturing in the Congo, in DRC and so forth, can actually, instead of it, cobalt being extracted, but to create, higher quality jobs and so forth. What needs to happen in our imagination in order to be able to lead us, towards that? But let me start with Mariana, just 1 minute with your thoughts, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, Jakob. So first, I'd like to say that the field of design really acknowledges this distance that you may have from the people that you are studying, if we're in a very researcher removed, or the people that you're working with. And so I think what's the beauty of this field is that there's acknowledgement of that, and there are tools put in place so you're able to collaborate from people that are directly impacted by the problem that you're studying, and you can come in as an external person and still bring a lot to the table, as long as you acknowledge that distance and that all the things that you might not know. The things that I think we found were really hard in terms of actually achieving full participation and understanding that context deeply, et cetera, is more due to the structures in place. So I talked about that a little bit, like not having control over the whole project, but also the fact that you just need a lot of time
on the
to
ground.
create those collaborations. And so thinking of the panel presentation this morning, thinking of degrowth and all that, like the concept of just doing things slowly, doing slow research, not always running after a publication or finishing a trial. I mean, that's also really important to achieve what we're hoping, equitable partnerships, and something that we are not at all incentivized to do. That's what I'll say on that.
Thank you, Mariana. I hope you'll write more about that, because I do think that's so important. Pedro, thank you.
Yes, your question is very complex and has been a matter of study since, I would say, very seriously since the 70s in Latin America. This, it has to do with the position of as raw material providers, as energy resources, as natural resources of these countries of the global South. So, especially when there are booming economies in Latin America, the debates come to, okay, let's process the raw material first before we export them. But of course, it needs capital. Yeah, it's capital to do the, let's say, industry of processing raw material. A very telling example is Ecuador and oil. Yeah, we export oil, but we import gasoline, diesel, and liquefied petroleum gas. More than half of the country's demand is imported because we do not have the refining capacity. In the first oil boom in the 70s, the government built a refinery. And that's it. That's what we have. A refinery from the 70s. So another refinery will require money. We require capital. Yeah? And that may be true for other minerals. Let's process other minerals, or to build, let's say, batteries or build wind turbines. And money for our countries is very expensive to borrow. Very expensive to borrow. So we can discuss about international cooperation. And let's see, for example, what happens with South Africa, which is receiving 8.5 billion to transit from coal to renewables. Yeah? Of course, with the 8.5 billion, they will have to decommission coal plants, but to buy foreign technology.
Right.
Of wind, solar, and what comes next, maybe hydrogen. Yeah, and that's an ongoing debate in our countries, and a very important actor in Latin America, at least, is the state. Can the state regulate the market? Can the state channel capital from the primary sector of the economy to the manufacturing sector? Can the state create a manufacturing sector, a real manufacturing sector? That's only questions that are still trying to be answered since in Ecuador since the 70s, for example. It's a very interesting debate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we could have gone on, and of course, we are also looking at the whole energy research, from very different angles and orientations, but it's a pleasure to, first of all, to know you both, Mariana and Pedro, and hopefully we'll remain in touch. Thank you very much, and thank you to Lilia. Thank you to Jing for helping us with this event, and of course, ultimately, also Harsh, who you've been carrying this project on your back, and also in facilitating some of the the organization of the event and thinking through how the modalities and so forth. But thank you everyone for your participation, and let's keep in touch. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Pleasure. Let's remain in touch.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.